So we'll move on to our next case study in terms of user needs. And Jessica Smith, who is Manager of Discovery and Research at JSTOR Labs, is joining us now. She's going to be talking about some work being done at in text analysis at JSTOR. Jessica, we're running a few minutes late, and that's fine. Feel free to take a few minutes because we have a bit of a long break after you. So
Okay.
don't feel like you have to end right at quarter of.
Okay, I'll try to at least stick close to that. Thanks for the introduction there.
Thanks.
I think something that's coming up today is, there is summative usability. You can call it formative and summative usability for the research that you do to determine needs. Is this even something people need or want to use? How does it fit into their current workflow? That there's that formative usability at the beginning of a study. And then there's also summative. Once you've got something built, you can do usability tests, heuristic evaluations, lots of different research methods to make sure that it's understandable. But I'm going to focus this on the first part, on finding out what people need when they're doing text mining and ways that we can support that. Just a quick recap of who we are. I think you know JSTOR, you may know Ithaca, the parent organization of all these nonprofits. There are 4 divisions of Ithaca, with JSTOR being the largest, but it's relevant to this presentation that we're talking about JSTOR and also Portico. If you are not familiar with Portico, it's an archive that's much, much, much larger than JSTOR, but it's also a dark archive. So it's only there for archive and preservation purposes, if a journal goes out of business, if something else happens to other copies. So we'll be talking about JSTOR and Portico today. So we at Ithaca and JSTOR knew that we wanted to look into the area of text mining, and I'm going to call it text mining, text analysis, possibly also TDM for text and data mining. I'll try to be consistent, but I may use any of those terms. We knew that we had a lot of content that was of interest to people to mine, and we were regularly contacted by people in the humanities and social sciences, which is what JSTOR is primarily made up of, who were interested in doing this. We started some initial research in 2017, and starting in 2019, started making a really concerted effort. Like we think we want to make a tool for text mining, but how can we make that useful? Is this something that people need JSTOR's help with? Let's see how people do text mining. One of the most useful types of formative research before a project starts is contextual inquiry. And that's something that I was trained in a long time ago. But the word context there is key. So this is observing somebody doing their work. And then there are lots of ways you can analyze that. You can see what are the steps that they take, what are cultural barriers they face, what are physical barriers they face. So ideally, you are supposed to be sitting beside them. Like the context is important. But both in this Zoom era and even prior to the pandemic, if I was doing something, trying to make a product for, let's say, senior Shakespeare scholars, it's hard to see them all in person. You can try to do that at a conference, but they're geographically distributed. So for years, I've been doing the closest I can get to ethnography through interviews, and I'll show you in a second what that looks like. We also did some desk research from blogs of some digital humanists who are at the forefront of humanities text mining, and also got those customer service conversations. When I said we'd been talking to people who've made requests over the years that I want this set of JSTOR articles to mine, we went back and looked at those conversations. What was it exactly those people needed, and what were they trying to accomplish? So I mentioned interviews that were the closest I can get to ethnography without being in the same room. And these are some of the questions that I initially asked. And I'd ask them to demonstrate, if at all possible, you know, step by step, how do you go from a research question to getting an answer? I want to see which applications they're using. Are they copying and pasting anything? Are they writing code from scratch? You know, what is happening here? So in a large set of those interviews, I found complete differences in the way experts worked and the way beginners worked. People who were, you know, new text mining backwards and forwards, and people who were trying to get into it. There were some big differences there. And I had mentioned earlier that when you're doing ethnographic research, even culture matters. And one of the cultural surprises I picked up here was, I'm calling it the ivory tower versus the silver platter. From the experts, there was a sense that, like, I really worked to learn how to code and text mine. All these other people just want it handed to them on a silver platter. They don't understand that it's complex. They don't understand that it takes years to do. And they're not willing to put in the work. So that was kind of the attitude that some experts had toward beginners. And then in vice versa, the beginners I've got here for the ivory tower would say these experts have all this knowledge and they're not willing to share it, and they're making it look harder than it is, and it's not accessible to me. So the general workflow that we observed text mining to take had 4 stages. One was sourcing, that is getting the actual text to mine. These are some quotes from experts. I don't have really quotes from beginners because they were not even sure what to do in some cases, or just trying to figure out what the steps should be. So for experts, they were seeing that it was frustrating, difficult, taking a long time to get access, sometimes more than a year, to the text that they wanted to mine, and that it wasn't always free. They might need a grant to make that happen. The next step was structuring. I love this quote: "I've got an unknown problem with an unknown solution." So you can't, you know, if you're collecting text from different sources, you might have to do data wrangling to get it into a format that it can be programmatically analyzed. This one said it well, to say you've got to expect that manipulations will be required. It's always bespoke, which, you know, makes it harder to teach to a beginner. It's not a recipe book that you can follow. It depends on what type of data you have. It depends on what type of question you're trying to answer. There's no single path. Once those 2 things were sorted out, there's actually running the scripts, doing the mining, and then interpreting the results. I don't have as many interesting quotes on these 2 because there was a scholar who said that the most lonely stage of the pipeline is mining and interpreting, and it's also the easiest. They were kind of saying it's hard to get started. Once you actually have clean data formatted in the right way, it's not hard to run a script. But people aren't even able to get to that point unless they really know what they're doing and have a lot of experience. I've also got a note here that you can't just run an algorithm without understanding exactly what it's doing and publish it. So that's also a part of what these beginner text miners needed. They didn't just need clean text and I'm going to run an algorithm with it and report. They had to understand the choices that were made in that algorithm. Like, are we throwing away certain stop words? Are we grouping by just unigrams, single words, or are we using bigrams and trigrams? So there was a really big gap between what beginners knew and what they needed to know to be able to mine text. And we saw that kind of as an opportunity. Some beginners said things like, time and anxiety keep me from learning it. They're kind of saying, I can't ask a research question because I don't even know what types of questions I can ask. Here's that idea of the ivory tower, that DH is a club and it isn't inclusive. Really, they were telling us, I don't know how I can text mine without spending 3 or 4 years learning to code, and I don't have time for that. There are some clickable tools that people are using. One is Voyant, that lets you just click to upload a text and it does this analysis. It's a helpful introduction to DH and maybe a helpful introduction to understanding what text mining does. But this doesn't solve a lot of the problems that we've talked about. It doesn't help you acquire text, doesn't help you clean up text. It doesn't give you so much of the details of what's going on under the hood in the algorithm. So it might be hard to be informed enough to publish a paper about your findings. So we thought we might be able to do something better. We were trying to go for the sweet spot between just clicking and give you a couple of canned analyses, like what's going on here, versus throwing you to the wolves and letting you figure out where to get the text, how to write the scripts, how to clean up the data yourself. There's somewhere in the middle, and that's where we were aiming for. Also worth noting, we talked to expert text miners who teach beginners. And this quote here, it wasn't a train wreck, it was worse than that. There were a lot of challenges to teaching it. It seemed like the only time people were having success was a one-on-one instruction. How we, talked about, it's a bespoke process. So it doesn't make sense that you could get a class of 20 people and have them going through 20 different processes at once. Even if you were trying to have them do the same shared exercise, there was a lot of technical setup required to run these scripts. Like you'd have to be installing Python and Anaconda on your machine. And this is the kind of thing that was hard to do in a lab environment. You have to keep walking around and helping everybody. It really hadn't been well suited to teaching in a class. So just to summarize, we learned about the needs people have that sourcing and structuring are the hard steps. It is a steep learning curve to learn to text analysis. And it's really hard to get there without at least some Python and R language. I mentioned that JSTOR is mostly humanists and social scientists. That's where we focused, though I did interview some STEM scholars. There was kind of a divide that social scientists were more likely to use R and humanists were more likely to use Python. We also found, though, that social scientists needed less help with this. It was really the humanists who weren't used to dealing with code at all. Social scientists may have taken statistics classes more so, were more comfortable with coding. And that beginners don't even fully understand what's accomplishable by text mining. So they needed a lot of help in a lot of ways. I mentioned the sweet spot we were going for between I'm just going to run a canned analysis in a graphical interface versus you're on your own, go learn to code. I loved this quote from Ted Underwood, who's a thought leader in the DH community. I will let you read that for a moment. So there at the end, he was theorizing that what had happened was people running workshops for digital humanities, particularly for text mining, saying, come learn it in an hour, 2 hours, you'll get it. But that was actually a welcome mat followed by a trapdoor, because just from a quick workshop, you weren't going to be able to get the skills you needed. We built Constellate, which I'm going to switch over in the browser and demo, but you'll be able to see. Maybe I will switch to the browser and demo. There's a Zoom window in my way. Apologies about that. Okay. So the idea is that this can be used by an individual learning text mining, but it's actually really well suited to that workshop scenario or to a semester-long class. We've kind of provided for sourcing and cleaning up the data, because we're offering, it's several million documents. I had a slide near the beginning. I don't remember the numbers. Yeah, about 40,000 entire journal runs and about 300,000 books that are mineable here. If you just search for something, you're getting live updates for this corpus, showing you how many documents it is, doing a little bit of initial analysis so you can get a sense for what's in there. There are cases where people want to stop here and they get exactly what they need from this, and seeing that when scholars were writing about cats, whiskers were much more commonly discussed in the early 1900s. If that answers your research question, some people can stop there. But realistically, I can say that when we were usability testing this, we really had to work to even make it clear at this stage that this was about text mining, because I had a number of text mining novices who got to this screen and said, oh, cool, it's like JSTOR, I can just see journal articles, and they didn't get that this was the corpus building step, and this was just the beginning. So it is pretty quick and easy. I'm going to make it a little smaller so this processes more quickly. Still a lot of documents. Let's say we only want books. Okay. So if you just set that up and click build, it relatively quickly compiles this data set for you. It may take up to 5 minutes, but that's giving you a clean data set that you can nearly immediately work with. I built this one about pianos earlier today. And for the experts, we didn't want to completely forget them. We knew they didn't need much help, but they still have the ability to download the data set to their computer and run their scripts. They can just take it from there. For beginners, I don't know if you're familiar with Jupyter notebooks, but that's commonly used in the Python community to run code in the browser. So you don't have to do all that system configuration first. So imagine you're teaching a workshop on how to mine text. Your students can create data sets of interest to themselves. So they're not having to use the same sample data set. They can, within 10 minutes, create one that's relevant to their own research interests, which makes the learning process all that more compelling. Then if you click Analyze, we have a lab section of the site that runs Jupyter notebooks online. We have some scripts that are created for various common tasks like topic modeling or finding significant terms. If you click that, it opens the Jupyter notebook with the code pre-filled. It is really heavily documented with the idea that someone who's just starting to learn Python can read through it and understand what's happening and why, which, as we said, was important. If someone wants to publish their results, they need to understand exactly what's happening. Jupyter notebooks are executable. So you can see that this is going to calculate TF-IDF, which is term frequency inverse document frequency. And it already has your data set pre-filled. In this case, it was the one I made about piano. So you can literally just hit run, and so on. And it goes through the script, but you can edit it without writing code from scratch. You don't need to understand all of that. Let me get a little further down. For instance, this is describing how to sort, how to clean up the tokens a little bit, the words. That, for instance, you might want to remove all the words in your analysis that are shorter than 4 characters. But maybe for my own purposes, I actually want to remove anything less than 5. So you can just change it and execute the code. We have been teaching with this in workshops, and institutions have started to offer their own workshops within the library teaching with this. It's been really promising. People started using it in 2020, and we're just getting out of the beta right now. But there's a lot of, there's some math in here, but it's generally also explained in plain English what's happening. I think that's roughly it. So we were able to meet most of the needs of the beginning text miners so that they're not lost trying to find some text that they can mine that's of interest to them. They're not having to format data from different sources. They're not having to write scripts from scratch, but are still able to see inside the black box. We actually thought about something like opening the black box of text mining being a tagline for this product. I am about at time. It said we could go over, but I will stop here and take any questions that we have.
Great, thanks, Jessica.
Mhm.
How long has this service been available?
Yeah, it was a beta in, I believe, summer 2020. We started as a beta, and right now we're transitioning out of beta into a real product.
You're not running beta for 15 years like Google does.
No.
um, as you've been working with the community on this
Mhm.
and getting feedback from the users, and I know this is hard to, I want to extrapolate your experience to the wider community. You have a kind of a range of users that go from experts who are at the cutting edge of designing these systems to I I have tried this a little and I want you to make this more usable to I've never done anything like this and how do I?
Yes.
Have you been changing the design or the features set for those different communities in different ways, or kind of building towards, you know, not pushing, inviting people along a path that is, if you don't know what you're doing, head over here. If you want if you want to download the code and rewrite it in, out of a Jupyter notebook and put it in R,
Mhm.
it's over here.
That is such a great question, because we went back and forth and back and forth near the beginning. It was so tempting to make the home page say, if you're a beginner, start here. If you know what you're doing, start here. And we even went through some iterations where it worked that way. But what we more so needed to do was, the experts who've used this, it's just, they know all the terms here. They see this page and say, oh yeah, it's going to let me construct a corpus. They don't need to be led through what's happening. And really, the main thing that we did for the benefit of the experts and what they needed, if I can get that tab to open. Sorry, let's go this way. Was in download. This is one example where we have a show me more. When we talk to beginners who sort of were starting to understand, they'd say something like, give me a CSV of this data set, because like, I understand CSV, I can open it in Excel, like that's a digestible type of information. The experts were more likely to want JSON, particularly JSON L. We have metadata, unigrams, bigrams, trigrams. That's sort of hidden from the beginner. They don't need to think about what is a trigram, because that's probably not what they want to download if they don't know what it is, until they've gone through tutorials, used the Jupyter notebooks. So that's one instance of where what the expert needs is a little bit hidden, and they've not had trouble finding it because they know what all of these
They
terms
know where
mean. Yeah,
They know
good.
where to look for it.
Exactly.
Um, are there, have you had license issues in setting this up?
Yeah, good question. Yes. So I've not been the person doing those negotiations, but as the user experience person, my understanding is that there is some open content in JSTOR. That's not a problem. The publishers for whom we are archiving documents in Portico, preserving them in Portico, they weren't put in there to with the intention of being publicly accessible. So that's a whole, like, that's not what the publishers signed up for.
Right.
Um, some of them are JSTORs are in the same space as JSTOR and we're creating their own text mining tools. So that's a little bit of a conflict there. What we got by with so far, and we're still working on it, we're still negotiating with some publishers, like, can your stuff be in here too, is a lot of the analysis can be run on unigrams. Again, I'm not familiar. I don't know how familiar you guys are with the text mining terms, but bag of words, meaning like we take a journal article, we throw all the words in a collection, but you can't read the article that way. There's a difference between consumptive and non-consumptive use. And most publishers, if it was non-consumptive like that, if you just throw somebody a list of these are all the words that occur in this journal article, they weren't concerned about that. As you get toward bigrams, every 2-word phrase that appears in an article, or trigrams, some publishers were really saying somebody could reconstruct this article. And I personally thought, if they want to do that, there's an easier way. I mean, surely they can steal an article in a different way. But
Yeah.
yeah, if somebody actually has a legitimate need for full text, like I need the PDFs, which occasionally happens with experts, we do have a method for letting them sign a contract agreement that they will, get rid of the documents at the end of their research and they won't share it with anybody. So this meets most needs, and most publishers have signed on. I know there are some that we're still working on.
Yeah. Again, I think that's along the spectrum. It is, if you are the kind of person who is going to recreate an article using trigrams, good on you. That's an interesting research project. You're probably pretty far along the path.
If you say trigram, what's that? You're probably near the beginning. So yeah.
Yes, right. All right. Well, this is, I mean, as someone who plays with this sort of text analysis for fun, this looks like a really cool tool. But I appreciate the thought and the as it relates to this conversation, the thought that went into this from the user perspective and trying to help to build tools with the user's needs in mind. So Jessica, thank you so much for your talk, and this is fantastic work. Thank you.